Hey, welcome to If These Woods Could Talk, produced by the Rhinelander District Library. My name is Matt. Thanks for stopping by. If these woods could talk, maybe they'd pack lecture halls and teach everyone about the history of the area from their own personal experiences or treasonal experiences. And they'd talk about history or natural sciences, or they'd teach Treeglish, which is a pidgin dialect reconciling English with tree speak. And they'd win Treacher of the Year awards. But we didn't find any wise old Professor Oaks or anything, so we went with the next best thing. Let's listen to her tell a story.
My name is Darlene Machtan, and we're talking about my first year of teaching at Rhinelander High School in 1977.
If these words could talk, would you sit and listen to tales of those who came before us in the virgin pines with the river glistening? Sit on back with friendlies, share some stories about butterflies, days gone by on the sunset hill of glory.
In September 1977, I was a first-year English teacher at Rhinelander High School. I was fresh out of college and ready to go. I had graduated with an impressive grade point in 2 majors. Student teaching had gone well. I had excellent letters of recommendation. I was pretty sure I had this. I didn't. I was in for any number of humbling experiences. Looking back on it now, they were pretty funny and definitely educational. At the end of August, I attended my first 3-day in-service that was to completely prepare me for a 180-day school year. I also received my teaching assignments. English 13, English 22, English 3444? What did any of that mean? Back then, the RHS English department grouped freshman and sophomore English classes by ability. The first number referred to the year in school, 1 for freshman, 2 for sophomore, and so on. The second number indicated ability level, 1 for the most gifted, 4 for the least. So English 13 meant lower level freshmen, 22 meant higher level sophomores, and 3444 meant bottom level juniors and seniors. New teachers were almost always given struggling students, an ironic rite of passage considering we were the least equipped to deal with them. I knew right off that I needed guidance, so I sought out a kindly silver-haired veteran teacher named Kitty Steinman for advice on a class we were both teaching. It wasn't until 2 precious hours later that I realized we weren't teaching the same class, and that the pages of notes I had assembled for a class I hadn't even been assigned were worthless. But that afternoon was the beginning of a long-lasting, deep friendship, and she offered me advice that has served me well my entire career. As I held her hand at her bedside the morning she died, many years later, I could still hear her saying that first day, "Above all, be kind. You can't save 'em all, but you can be kind." I have had to remind myself of both halves of that mantra many, many times. So, with 3 days of pseudo-preparation, I began my teaching career the day after Labor Day. I was 21 years old and looked like a senior. I was constantly being stopped by other teachers who wanted to see my hall pass. The 22s, sophomores, had my number from day one. Early on one 7th hour, the last hour of the day, one of the boys came up to me before class started and said, "Look at these cool handcuffs I got. Want to try them?" What the heck, I thought, why not? He snapped them on my wrists and gave them a tug. I laughed and said, "Okay, unlock them." He reached into one pocket, then another, and another with an increasingly feigned, panicked expression and said, "Oh my gosh, I think I left the key at home. I'm really sorry. I can go home right now if you want me to, or else after school and bring it back." That was said with all the sincerity of a politician promising to lower taxes. But what could I do? I started class as if teaching in handcuffs was business as usual, and it went pretty well until a guidance counselor knocked on the door to introduce a brand new transfer student he had added to my class. I'm sure I mightily impressed both of them as I grasped the paperwork in my manacled hands. As luck would have it, the boy miraculously found the key just before the final bell rang. Who could have guessed? Those 22s were smart enough to know I had no classroom management skills and, above all, just wanted to be liked. I had no idea how out of control things were until on September 27th, the day of my 22nd birthday, when my class went with 2 other sophomore classes to the auditorium to watch To Kill a Mockingbird. Let's just say my students made their unruly presence very well known. Afterwards, an experienced teacher not too much older than I was said to me, "Oh, I feel so sorry for you. Your kids are animals. Why do you let them behave like that?" That night, I went home to my little rundown cottage on Boom Lake and cried the entire evening. I wasn't going to let my freshmen get the best of me, though. Candy and gum weren't allowed in any classrooms at the time, and it required constant vigilance to enforce that rule. One day, after lunch, the class clown, who I had strategically placed in the seat directly in front of where I stood, looming over him, neatly lined up 3 rows of 5 gummy bears on his desktop. "Put those away," I quietly ordered. "I'm not going to eat them," he promised, "just going to look at them." But of course, they magically and surreptitiously disappeared one by one throughout the hour until I finally caught him popping one into his mouth. "That's it," I bellowed. "Get your stuff and go to the office." "No," he pleaded, "not the office." "Yes," I commanded, "the office. Now." He slid out of his desk, dropped to his knees, clasped his hands in supplication, batted his eyes, and tearfully begged, "Please, please, please, anything but the office. My father will kill me." It was a performance worthy of an Academy Award. I said through gritted teeth, "The office. Now." He slowly and dramatically rose to his feet, brushed himself off, and asked in total and incredulous innocence, "On what grounds?" "Insubordination," I growled. "Oh, I see. Well then," he said to me in his rapt audience of 30 admirers in his best British accent, "Ta-ta, pip-pip, and goodbye." With a flourish, he was out the door, and somehow the last of the gummy bears had departed with him. I didn't fare any better with the 3444s. I was a mere 4 years older than some of them. At that time, after a lifetime of a miserable existence in school, they had but one goal: to bide their time and drop out as soon as they turned 16. Unfortunately for them and me, that fall, Wisconsin raised its legal age to quit school from 16 to 18, and now we were stuck with each other until at least the end of the year. There were about 15 of them. Small class. Easy, right? 15 angry teenagers who despised school and only showed up when they felt like it. I knew I was in trouble the first day when I called roll. The last 2 surnames were homonyms. They sounded the same, but were spelled differently. 4-letter word names, and rightly so. One with an O, the other one with a U. When they told me they were brothers, I asked which spelling was correct. They looked at each other and shrugged, as if to ask what possible difference could it make. They and their classmates had the same level of intellectual curiosity about everything else I presented for their consideration. No matter how relevant I tried to make the subject matter, the lessons fell on deaf ears, and the 55-minute classes were an exercise in futility and clock watching for all of us. I was pretty sure they hated me as much as they hated school, and that they couldn't wait for an opportunity to exact their revenge. It came on Halloween. I had an inkling they had something devious planned, but I was helpless to stop it. I lived at a resort, a collection of about 10 tiny identical cottages. The brothers of the same name with 2 different spellings lived just a couple miles away, and I had made the mistake once of revealing where I lived. That Halloween night, when it was good and dark, they and their crew pelted my house and my first new car with dozens of eggs. I could hear the eggs smashing against the sides and roof of the cottage in my car, but I didn't dare go out to try to stop it. I was crushed to think, although I was trying so hard to reach them, that they held me in such contempt. But eventually I had the last laugh. The next morning, they all wanted to know how my night had been. I said casually and with absolute calm, "Great. How was yours?" "Okay," they said, "but didn't anything weird happen at your house since it was Halloween and all?" "No, just an ordinary night," I assured them. Then I started yet another lesson I was confident they would ignore. It took until the last day of school in June for one of the brothers to finally say, "So, you never told us about your cottage being egged on Halloween." I looked him straight in the eye and said, "My house was never egged. What are you talking about?" "Yeah, it was," he chortled. "We egged it on Halloween. Totally annihilated it in the car out front, too. Cottage 10, Mickey Sunset Bay Resort. That's you, right?" "No, not me," I lied. "I'm in Cottage 6. "6? 6? Damn it," he said, looking at the rest of his cronies. "We wasted all those eggs on the wrong house." It was one of the most satisfying lies of my entire career. The tide finally changed around November. It was the end of the day, at the end of an endless week, and I was exhausted. I was back at it with the 22s, doing my best to combine education with entertainment sans handcuffs, but it was clear I was the only one in the room listening to my voice. I finally threw down the chalk, dropped my book on the desk, and said, "I'm done here. I'm going out into the hall before I say something I'll regret. You get all this garbage out of your systems, and when you're ready to learn, I'll come back to teach." Then I walked out the door, slamming it shut behind me. I gave them about 5 minutes to think about it while I walked the hall and tried to cool off. I was all set to head back in, but when I got to the door, I saw Jimmy at the front of the room, throwing down the chalk, dropping the book on the desk, and saying in a voice that sounded much too much like mine, "I'm done here. I'm going out into the hall before I say something I'll regret. You get all this garbage." Before he could finish mimicking me, I threw the door open, strode across the room, grabbed him by the front of his shirt, and dragged him across the floor, out the door, and the entire length of the hall. It wasn't hard to do since I had 5 inches and probably 50 pounds on him. When I ran out a hallway, I pushed him up against the glass windows of the library. I tightened my grip, leaned in, looked down, and hissed into his face, "Don't you ever mock me again. Do you understand what I'm saying to you? Do you understand?" "Yes, ma'am," he sputtered. I understand." "Then get back to class, sit down, shut up, and try to learn something," I ordered. I was right behind him as he scurried down the hall. It wasn't until later that I found everybody in the library had witnessed the entire ordeal. They were almost as scared as Jimmy was. Well, that night his mother called me, of course. I told her what had happened. She said, "He's been asking for it for months around home, too. I'm divorced and not big enough to do anything with him, so he gets away with being disrespectful. I'm glad you let him have it. You have my blessing to do it again. Anytime. Have a good night." These days, I'd be gone in 60 seconds. I know I shouldn't have done it, and I know I shouldn't advocate violence, but word got around after that the new teacher wasn't a pushover. By December, I had finally started to get the hang of balancing student affection with respect. It was December 21st, and I was getting married on the 30th. My teaching colleagues either didn't know or were too busy with their own lives to care. Getting married seemed like a non-event to everyone but me. I guess I had mentioned it in passing to my students out of desperation to share it with someone, anyone. Anyway, it was 7th hour, the last class of the last day before Christmas vacation, when 55 minutes lasts a lifetime and nothing much good ever happens. I knew I had to just get through it. I was about ready to start class when one of the kids contrived some elaborate excuse to get me to walk with her down the hall. Given my 7th-hour track record, I was understandably suspicious. I made short work of the attempted diversion, and when I saw the classroom door was closed, expecting the worst, I threw it open and hurried her back inside. "Surprise!" the whole class yelled. All of them, including Handcuffed Boy and Jimmy, were grinning ear to ear. There were a couple wedding bell decorations hanging lopsidedly from the ceiling. Cake, punch, paper plates, cups, and plastic forks crowded my desk, and a carefully wrapped present had been prominently placed beside it all. On the board was scrawled, "Happy Wedding, Ms. Machtan." They had pooled their money to buy my soon-to-be husband and me an expensive salt and pepper shaker set. Salt and pepper? I never quite figured out why that was their choice, but it seemed fitting somehow. I left that day feeling like maybe we were starting to understand and appreciate each other. It was for sure one of the highlights of my wedding, of that first year of teaching, maybe of all the years of my teaching. 33 years in the Rhinelander School District followed that one, and another 13 as a charter school consultant and Nicolet College adjunct. I'm still at it, having spent 47 years as an educator. For the last 5 years, I've been teaching inmates at the Oneida County Jail. That's been a completely different learning curve. It's extremely gratifying work, but I'm still learning the ropes. I know I can't save them all, but I can be kind. One of these days, I hope to finally manage to get it just right. At least I haven't ended up again in handcuffs. Yet.
Hey, thanks for listening to another episode of If These Woods Could Talk. Thanks to Darlene Machtan for stopping by, and special thanks to the Old Pine Road Band for the musical theme. Remember to follow If These Woods Could Talk on Facebook and Instagram. Follow the Rhinelander District Library on Facebook and Instagram, and subscribe to the podcast wherever you get your podcasts, and you can get the new episodes as they appear. Thanks.